Say It Loud Network presents Corner Table Talk.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Corner Table Talk. And today I am really honored to have with me Nelson George. Nelson is a journalist, a prolific author. He's written over 20 books and counting. Columnist, music and culture critic, filmmaker. I've counted 14. I'm probably wrong there, but that's not including a few documentaries where he is the interviewer, the interviewee, the producer. Nelson attended St. John's, interned initially at the Amsterdam News up in Harlem, and music editor for Record World Magazine, music editor for Billboard, wrote a great column called Native Son for the Village Voice. And also something I found out recently, Nelson, just looking into, and I thought I knew almost all there was to know about you, but I didn't realize that you put up some of the dough for Spike and She's Gotta Have It.
Yeah, man. That was one of the best investments of my life. Aside from starting Spike's career, I think I put in 3,500 at the time, and I've made like 20 times that back or something like that over the years.
That's better than Tesla, man.
That's great. When that Netflix show came on Netflix, the series, I got another check. So I was like, "Yo!"
So what did Spike show you to get your interest? Did you just read the script, or was there a short, or what got you?
So I met Spike. I saw a student film of his called Joe's Bedside Barbershop. We Cut Heads on PBS of all things, and I thought, "Wow, this is great." Somehow, through a girl, I got in contact with him, and we talked a little bit, and then I ended up moving literally 2 blocks from him in Fort Greene in the spring of '85. So he said, "Come over to my house." He lived, if you remember that part of Brooklyn well, Myrtle Avenue. They used to call it Myrtle. Mm-hmm. So I had to get across Myrtle, looking this way and that way. In mid '80s, you had to look both ways.
Yeah. And
Spike lived down a little alleyway, and all he had in his house was a bed, a Michael Jordan poster, Laserdisc, remember those? Yeah. And he had a big old Steenbeck editing machine, which no kids know what those are anymore because they can do everything on a Mac. But then you needed a big device with reels of film. So on this device, he played me the rough of She's Gotta Have It. And I just thought he captured black people I'd never seen on film. The Buffy Morris Greer, the B-boy that he played, Morris Blackman, Nola Darling, the bohemian black girl, graphic designer. So all of these characters and the way he sort of depicted New York and young black people, this is fresh, as we used to say back in the day. And he needed money to finish the film. And I had just the first time I ever made any money was I did a quickie bio of Michael Jackson. They came out in '84 in the wake of Thriller and all that stuff. So I actually had money for the first time in my life. And I lent him, I think in two different sums money. And man, that film, he took it to the San Francisco Film Festival, and then he went to Cannes, and he came back as the Black Woody Allen. And that was that. So that was that neighborhood, as you may probably remember, became like a really black arts area from early '80s to maybe the late '90s. Everyone came through there in one form or another. So many artists. I want
to come back to that because that was just such a rich cultural time in terms of the kind of creatives, as you mentioned, that were there. And I certainly remember She's Gotta Have It hitting the theaters. And we had always gone to see Shaft and Superfly and those nostalgic movies, but there was something different about the atmosphere around She's Gotta Have It and then Do the Right Thing. And just to see young black folks fill up a theater and there for the purpose of seeing a Spike Lee film, that was a different experience. I remember going to the Lowe's at Columbus Circle.
That's the one. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, man. It was just right. It was just such
the line was a party. Being in line for that movie, it was, I always felt like that was a coming of age kind of for that generation. I don't remember this. There was an after party at the Puck Building for one of the premieres. And it's absolutely on my list, thinking of nightlife, one of the best parties of my life. Because we'd all seen the movie, and Fab Freddy was there, and the Knicks were there, and rappers and models. And it was like, oh, we are making a move through the door. And that movie opened the door for Reggie Hudlin, for myself, for Robert Townsend, so many people. It just showed that black film was more than just Eddie Murphy, that we could tell our own stories.
Oh, yeah.
And make them, and so that was a significant event.
And great casting, man. I have to tell you, my dad had a place on the Upper West Side where I grew up called The Cellar. And John Canada Terrell was a regular customer who would come and stand at the top of the stairs as if he were his character in She's Gotta Have It and pose for a moment before descending.
What a character John was. I mean, it didn't take a lot of acting for him to play that character. He played Greer Childs.
Greer Childs, yeah.
And I think his introduction to the film, he drives up in a sports car, convertible. Yeah, she's a typical Brooklyn tech head. It was great, yeah. And John was really, he worked in a few other films during that era, but basically he was always John Canada Terrell.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So before we go too much further, I have what I call short order questions, a little play on the restaurant world of fast order food that I'm going to just rapid fire at you. You give me your quick response, and then we'll get back into our conversation here. But so Brooklyn restaurant you frequent the most often?
Now?
Yeah. Or even through the years, if you want to throw it back.
A couple of those Walters on DeKalb, right across from Fort Greene Park, has been a regular for mine for years. When I lived in Fort Greene, I like Roberta's, the pizza shop in Bushwick, which is excellent. I heard they just opened up a spot here in LA, actually.
I heard that too, yeah.
And one other one. You got to put Junior's in.
Junior's, of course.
Come on, you gotta get that cheesecake, man.
Yeah, man. I know you like to travel, Nelson. Favorite hotel or place that you've visited?
Well, favorite hotel is probably going to be the Standard Spa in Miami, because they have this beautiful, they have a hammam in their main room. You know, that marble, it's like a marble slab with steam. So you do the wet steam, the dry steam, and you get on the hammam and you're good. You're cleaned out every pore in your body. And so also Miami has great Cuban food. So the combination of a great spa and Cuban food, you can't beat that.
Man, you sure can't.
I said the favorite place, but I would say my favorite place, most beautiful place was Amalfi Coast.
Ooh, yeah.
My girlfriend and I went there maybe 3-4 years ago, and I read an article that said that the water was so blue that you can't tell where the sky and the ocean meet. And it really was like that. It was like this beautiful wall, and the food was unbelievable.
I have not been, but I have heard, and you set it up pretty well there, and it's got to be on my map. I remember, though, going to speaking of steam rooms, your buddy Russell Simmons took myself and a few friends to the Russian steam
bathhouse.
The bathhouse, right. After playing basketball, we hung out. That was fun. Yeah.
And supposedly that steam room, I don't know if it's still open, but that steam room had been built before the rules in New York City. So it was apparently the hottest steam room in New York City.
I believe it. Well, I look forward to having a cocktail with you at some point in Miami. Best live show you've ever attended?
Damn. Well, you know what? I'm going to go with Earth, Wind & Fire at Madison Square Garden. Earth, Wind & Fire at their peak, late 70s, jazz, funk, Afro-Cuban, magic tricks. They could do beautiful ballads. They could do crazy up-tempo. They had tricks where the drum sets would spin around and Maurice would be on one side and then he'd disappear and pop up over here. I've seen many, many, many great shows, but that always sticks to me as the epitome of musicianship and showmanship.
Yeah, man. I listened to that double album, the Gratitude album recently, from first track to last track, man. I'm what a piece of art. That
Gratitude is a great record, man. And also of it is live track.
And it was also good for getting rid of seeds when we were in college too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Another conversation.
Exactly.
All right. Converse All-Stars or Pro Keds?
Pumas.
Oh,
Pumas, man. I have right now I have red Pumas, blue Pumas, black, and I have a copy of Clyde's that I never wear, white ones, the green stripe that says Clyde on it. So Pumas.
I love it, man. I love it. All right. Favorite off the bench New York Knick of all time?
It's a childhood thing. When I was a kid, when the Knicks started getting good around 68, 69, they used to have these things in New York where players would come to like the hood, to the ghetto. And Mike Reardon, number 6, came to Brownsville. And I was like, he's in the projects. So I always give Mike Reardon, who was a 6th man in those good Knick teams, a lot of respect. So I always say Mike Reardon.
Yeah, I like him. Cassie Russell was my guy.
Well, Cassie was the same generation. I was going to say Cassie. But because I had the direct connection with Reardon, I thought that was I just was amazed as white guys in the hood in 1968.
Yeah, unbelievable, right? And very rare.
Yeah.
All right, person, past or present, you would most like to have a cocktail with?
Tough. That's so tough. I think probably Richard Wright, the great writer. My column in the Village Voice was called Native Son, for years, and that was named after his famous novel. So I'd probably sit with him and, ask, because he was kind of the first black superstar writer of the post-war period, after World War II. And, basically, he had to leave America because he felt so harassed. He moved to Paris, I think in 48 or 49, and never came back. So I would be really curious to see what he would think of how the world had evolved.
Yeah, that would be incredible, man. I recently watched a clip of Soul from, the early 70s, and I watched a conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin.
Right.
And it's just so interesting, man, knowing what we've just and continue to go through, but what 2020 kind of put in our faces again, and to hear the words of some of the Richard Wrights and the James Baldwins and the Malcolms, and how, those resonate still today.
Unfortunately, the fundamentals haven't changed. There's been progress, and don't everybody say there hasn't been. But the fundamental inequalities have not shifted for the majority of Black people.
No. The last time that I saw you, Nelson, I don't know if you remember, about a little bit more than a year ago, in Los Angeles, we were at the premiere for The Black Godfather.
Yeah.
We had a nice little chat for a minute. And it was also the last time, man, that I saw Andre Harrell, who we lost. Last year.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about Andre. Andre, to me, was just such an influencer, nightlife guy. He would be every place I ever opened, and the coolest energy, just his spewing out his Andre-isms. But give us just a little bit of what you recall about Andre in that way.
So Andre Harrell was the founder of Uptown Records, but I met Andre when he was still a rapper, and it was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And we became really close during that time. I remember he had an office in Brooklyn. People don't remember. Uptown actually started in Brooklyn. He had an office on 4th Avenue after he first got money to start it. And Heavy D would be in there. And, we have a very interesting professional connection. So I was hanging out. He was part of my basketball crew with Russell Simmons, Gary Harris, the late Gary Harris as well. Yeah. But he would have these parties, and at that party, there was a girl named Beverly Bond. And DJ. Beverly, but then she was just a young woman, but she was known as a great dancer. So everyone would start going, "Go Beverly, go Beverly, go Beverly." And out of that party, the idea for a movie called Strictly Business came. So, which I co-wrote and came out in 91. And basically the character that Halle Berry plays in the film was inspired by Beverly and inspired by that party. So that, being around Andre was always a sense of, creativity and possibility. Also, he was a man of many sayings, there's the budding wavies. Those are girls that had nice wavy hair. He always used to say, here's the mighty Nelson George coming. He always had a
Ghetto Fabulous.
Ghetto Fabulous. He had so many names and flavors. He passed away this past year of a heart attack. And actually, there's a crew. I sit with his cousin, O'Neill McKnight. I'm sure you know O'Neill. Mm-hmm. And, every now and then we get together on a Sunday night and just smoke a cigar in tribute to him. Because Andre was he was somebody you never forgot. And he was a signature part of nightlife, whether it was New York in the 80s, 90s, or LA in the 90s going forward. We would always there was a great R&B party here at the Blind Dragon that, Allison, you might remember Allison, she was a promoter. She used to do this party at the Blind Dragon where DJ MOS would play. And, Andre would come through and we, every now and then we'd have they'd play some Uptown or they'd play some New Jack Swing. So he still had that flavor. He still had that energy. Passed away way too soon.
Yeah, man. Yep. And that rarely can you attribute the title of original to someone, but Andre, man, was an original, and I know not soon to be forgotten. So my condolences for the loss of your good friend there.
Yeah.
So Nelson, there's a lot going on in the world these days, man. 2020 was pretty revealing. I feel like the universe just pressed a giant pause button on us and said, we really need to stop things here for a moment and you all need to pay attention. And in some ways, I feel that was very necessary. And that's not to diminish people who lost businesses and friends and family, but the world is really kind of spinning in a direction. You mentioned, we were talking before we came on about the effects of global warming and the impact that that's going to have on some of the coastlines. I'm just curious, as you are spending time between New York and LA these days, what's your sense of things? Where do you feel like we are, new administration and the vaccine on the way? Give us just kind of the Nelson George overview of some of that.
I don't dread opening up the New York Times anymore. Every day I was like, there's some new stuff about to happen. And, just meanness, cruelty. Cruelty was the hallmark of the Trump administration. Cruelty was the point of the Trump administration. Ignorance and a disrespect for science. I feel all of that has been, I feel very much like a weight has been lifted. We're not out of the woods of anything, but the fact is that I don't feel like every day there's going to be a major catastrophe, which I always feared every day. And there would be major catastrophes. I feel much better about life in terms of the national spirit. I say something that really does bother me, being between the two cities, particularly out here, is a homeless problem. It's really terrible, and it's bad in New York. It's awful out here. But when people say the homeless problem, what they're really talking about is income inequality. We don't have enough homes for working class people. We don't have enough mental illness. I mean, we don't have any kind of system where most of these people need treatment. They don't need to be in jail. Working class people are being forced to live in their cars. When COVID hits, you really see how ineffective the healthcare system is. So there is a fundamental problem with capitalism and how money is distributed in this country. And until we address that, we're not going to get rid of homelessness. We're not going to really address the healthcare. We have to really look at how we value people. And that's been something that's really been a fundamental. We've lost empathy. When we were growing up, Brad, there were words like brotherhood. That was a word that was tossed around a lot when I was a child. The brotherhood of man. No one in the public space speaks about that anymore. The need to bring us together as human beings that's not part of the national dialogue, either on the right, even on the left. So we got to get back to, we're all in this together. I don't see how, and we all have to look at fundamentally, how do we value each other? And what is the value? Is it all about making money, or is it about a good life for everyone? And until we address those fundamental questions, I don't see how we really change everything.
Wow, man. I speaking of the New York Times, I read an article when the pandemic was first unfolding, and it talked about how whatever was happening in your head and your mind and whatever you were inclined to be, if you were nervous, you were anxious, the pandemic was going to accelerate that. If you were spiritual, you were going to go further with spirituality. And I think we've seen the extremes of our culture, right, emerge relative to what you were just saying, where people bum rush the state capitol, and, yet we feel this levity now that we've got a new administration. So those of us that are hopeful, we're more inclined now to be hopeful. So when you look around, and I know I haven't been back to LA, but I have heard about the homeless situation. And it's interesting, Nelson, because, when you think about New York and you see how New York shut down, and when I first heard how, immediately the mayor and the governor in California reacted and shut businesses down, I thought, oh, smart, good. They're going to put a clamp on it, contain the virus and what have you. But then LA has gone through several resurgences, and you see lots of storefronts that are now boarded up and shut down. I was in South Beach a few weeks ago, and man, you wouldn't even know there was a pandemic. People were out. I was at Prime 112 with my son having dinner. I had a mask on, the staff had a mask on, but people were out and about. Now, I'm not condoning that at all. But when you look at the potential impact of one plan versus the other, what's your take on that? How far back do you feel this is set LA or New York? And what's your overall?
Well, a couple of things. One is, when you have inept national leadership, the reason we have such a problem is that we never had a national plan. You have a patchwork here. So this state does this state that. How do you stop a global pandemic with a patchwork? You can't. We needed to have a national response. We needed to have, we should have everyone who gets on a plane should have had to been checked for corona. We never had a national plan. So that's the absence of leadership from Trump and his company, I think, hurt a lot. As to your point about these cities, New York is interesting because I spent most of the summer in New York. And so Midtown Manhattan is a ghost town. 6th Avenue, 5th Avenue, ghost town. There's nobody there. Even Times Square, in the middle of the summer, which is usually packed with tourists, it still had people, but it wasn't the numbers that you're used to. So I think that the skyscraper business, the real estate industry, which is a big part of New York, is in a lot of trouble. That said, Brooklyn was alive. The neighborhoods, whenever I went to a neighborhood, people were out. People were on their stoop. People were eating in sidewalk cafes. People were playing DJ music in their front. There was a great sense of community I found in Bed-Stuy, in Fort Greene, throughout Brooklyn. I've seen parts of that. So the neighborhoods are vibrant because people can stay there and they've been able to build bonds. And be able to work at home, which is, key. So the shift in like what we're doing right now, we're never going to go back to 100% everyone in those buildings and, the skyscrapers in 6th Avenue. So the question will become, what do we do with these buildings? Because they're going to be half full at best, and that's the same true in downtown LA. I know San Francisco, all those tech companies, everyone's, not in those buildings. So there's an opportunity, I believe, if we go back to our earlier conversation about homelessness, are we going to have the guts to say to these real estate, no, these buildings are empty? Can we repurpose some of this for housing? I mean, that's going to be the big issue in New York. It's going to be a big issue in San Francisco. All of these big hubs with tall skyscraper buildings that workers are not going back to. Will we have the vision as a nation to see an opportunity and turn a tragedy into something positive? I think really that's going to be the challenge because, man, as a New Yorker, if you walk down Fifth Avenue right now, you'd be like, what? There's nobody here.
Wow.
6th Avenue, there's nobody here.
Yeah. And I think, the key word you used earlier is empathy. Are we empathetic enough to address that situation? And I think the idea of repurposing some of those, what will be, empty office spaces as residential is certainly a viable idea. Do you miss restaurants, Nelson? Do you miss being able to just roll into a spot, man, and see your regular crew and
my favorite spot. So I have a lot of little spots, like all of us who go out a lot. But my favorite, my ritual for years was I get up in Brooklyn, work out, do some writing. I take the J train. I go to Equinox, work out, get the steam, the little sauna. And then there's a spot called Hampton Chutney. I don't know if you know it. It's the dosa spot. It used to be on Prince, now it's on Grand. They make these dosas. I have a little chai. They have chai from India. And I would get my notebook out and I would post up there from 1:30, 2 o'clock to maybe 4 or 5, either sit outside or sit inside. I knew all the waitress. I knew all the hostess staff. They knew when I walked in, they have a dish called the Nelson, that they just, it's the Nelson. Okay, blah, blah, blah. And I would sit there. I'd meet friends there. So even though I had a membership at Soho House and these other spots, this was one of my it just gave me a sense of community. I got the same thing. Those rituals that you have with any great spot. And so I definitely miss that. I miss that connectivity. I miss, it's the friends thing. Oh, here's Nelson. You getting the Nelson? Okay. And order him that chai. Blah, blah, blah. He wants two. That connectivity, man, you don't realize how important that is to your sense of personhood because you have this connection with these people. You talk about their kids, how's it going at school or, all of that stuff. And, it just, the app, even at Soho House, there's a couple of waiters that I know, like out here, a couple of brothers who work at Soho House in the West Hollywood. Oh, Nelson, what's up, man? Yeah, take that spot over by the thing. I got you in a minute. That, that connectivity, you don't realize how big a part of it is your personhood when it's gone.
And you threw me back. You remember Lucky Strike?
Sure. Oh, that was another one.
Oh, man. I used to love taking the New York Times and the Lucky Strike and just the way that a Keith McNally room just made you feel about yourself was unique, right? Balthazar pastis.
Yes. Oh, man. All those spots. I mean, Lucky Strike, I used to go to after Knick games. So, you go to a Knick game, you take the A train. It's maybe 3 stops to Canal, 4 stops to Canal. You go in, and then if you're going to go out, now you're in the right spot. At Lucky Strike, you can go this way, that way, hook up with people for your next, 3 or 4 hours of activity. And so it was a signature spot. I had a 50th birthday party there. I remember one time. 50th. So the thing about New York is, is it is it does regenerate itself. But I do feel like it's regenerating itself. Manhattan itself is going to be an interesting question. What's going to happen? When I talk to young people, they all want to be in Brooklyn. Everyone wants to be in Bushwick. They want to be in Bed-Stuy. They want to be in those areas. They're not talking about being in the East Village. So the Village is over for young. I mean, unless you're an NYU student. I mean, no young people hang out in the Village anymore, really.
Is that so? I didn't realize that. Why is that?
There's nothing there. There's nothing there for them. There's no clubs anymore, right? All those brownstones are filled. You really see that young energy that brings the creativity happening in Brooklyn. Maybe in some parts, still pockets of the Lower East Side, but it's so much been pushed east or even over to Jersey. So Manhattan itself is undergoing a different identity crisis. When I get on the J train, half of the kids on there, people on there are young people who go to NYU or go to some of those schools downtown who can afford to get an apartment in Bushwick or parts of Bed-Stuy. But they can't afford a place necessarily unless they're trust fund kids. It's hard for them to afford a place in Manhattan. Because all of those things that all the places that supported the artists that we knew who could make it, I do a gig every now and then I do a little hustle on the side. That is just too expensive. Or you have people living 3 or 4 for the apartment.
Right. And that's been happening for a while. I mean, we've seen that process unfolding. I remember playing basketball at West 4th Street Park, every Saturday morning and going over to a little spot called the Bagel. That was, a little slice of it. Remember the Bagel?
Right,
slice of a restaurant. But just all those little cool spots, man, that just one after another started to just disappear as the neighborhood, I guess the term is gentrified. Yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that I'll tell you what makes me sad, and I'm sure the coffee shop, man.
Oh,
when that went out.
Yeah.
Because I have a picture here in my house of me standing. I took a picture the day it closed. A picture of me standing in front of the coffee shop. Because that was another one of those. Now here, check this out. It's a Chase Manhattan Bank.
Oh, no.
And they have check it out. But check out what they did. Next to the bank part, the entrance, over here, they have a quote unquote coffee shop. They put a little coffee stand.
No, they didn't.
Oh, man. Oh, man.
And what, a picture of Jelly Bean in the window? Really fronting. So I want to shift gears here a little bit, Nelson, because it's just so many things, man. I wanted to try to get to with you because you're just such an interesting cat, man. But I want to talk about some of your writing and books in particular. And by the way, before I do, Marie Brown sends her warmest regards to you. She knew that I spoke with her yesterday. She knew we were going to talk today, and she just wanted to make sure that I said hello to you. She talked
Marie
about the Doubleday offices and hanging out and how fond she is of you. Yeah.
That was when I was just wanting to be a writer. I met her and I would just go like, this is where they make books. I was so excited. Oh, please tell her I said hello. Wow, man.
I will do that. So, the book that I wanted to dive into is one you wrote a while ago, but I thought it was just really pivotal and also touched on the decades that, I thought were, pretty relevant to me in my life in terms of my world of being in the restaurant business. But it's called Buffy's, B-Boys, Baps, Boho, and Boho's Notes on a Post-Soul Black Culture. Just give me the Nelson George synopsis of your own work here. What were you hoping to get across with this book? Well,
this book, the title reflects the very kinds of Black people I was encountering in New York. The Buppy, the Black yuppie, the B-boy, self-explanatory, bohos. I was trying to deal with the whole Fort Greene bohemian thing. And Baps was this kind of like the kind of girls I dated, basically. These kind of, Black American princess chicks. But Notes on Post-Soul Black Culture comes from an essay I wrote for the Village Voice in the around 90 or so about how we were not in the soul culture. We were in another era where hip hop, you had the Black Rock Coalition, you had the Black film thing, you had a different kind of Black, it wasn't civil rights anymore. It was some other concoction. A lot of talk was around Mandela and Free Mandela. So most of the articles in that book come from the Village Voice and from the Native Son column and some of the other journalism I did. So the immediacy of that work is because they literally were things I was writing as things were happening. It has everything there from a review of Bobby Brown's, Don't Be Cruel album to a profile of a guy I grew up with, Willie Randolph, played for the Yankees, who went on later to manage the Mets.
I love that chapter, man. That was fantastic. As a sports fan myself, just the image of you being able to sit and talk to Willie in their locker room and going to Yankee Stadium. And I always loved going to Shea and going to the Garden. What those venues just did to you when you first walk in and you see all that grass, or you feel the magic of Madison Square Garden.
I tell you something. I mean, I've been to to a lot of NBA arenas now, travel, there's nothing like game night on Madison at a good, like the Knicks are decent and they're playing a good team. There's electricity in that room. It's like no other place I've ever been. So yeah, so capturing all that. And then there's a lot of stuff about, one of the big essays in there is about the shooting, the guy named Edmund Purry. He was a young black guy who was accused of shooting a New York City cop. And so it's a wide range. It really captures that, I don't know, late 80s to early 90s New York. There's a whole essay. One of my favorite ones is something like about David Dinkins and Al Sharpton and how Dinkins was the mayor, but Sharpton had, at that time, was very much if you were really in trouble when you were black, you went to Sharpton.
That's who you called. Yeah.
You called. So dealing with all of these different dynamics of New York and also the global culture, Yeah, it's one of my favorite books, man. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and you go between New York and L.A. You have been quite some time, and in this book you bounce between both. And one of the things that I thought that was really interesting is when you started to cover hardcore rap, gangster rap, the West Coast rap, we'll call it. I moved to L.A. in '89. And had, experienced the rap scene starting to, unfold in New York. And when I got to LA, certainly, was witness to some of that. But there was a quote that you used that I thought was really interesting. And it was the chapter was about Tupac. And I don't know that this quote is specific to Tupac, but I thought I just wanted to read it to you and get your thoughts on it. You said, Tupac and the violence you saw growing up and around the music world, you said, quote, "A studio gangster can't outrhyme a bullet, and real gangsters rarely outlive them." And I thought that was really interesting because there's obviously, you grew up in Brooklyn. I'm from New York. We've known people that were real hustlers and some that, are locked up or unfortunately dead. And we also have been, privy to the music world, and we see some people who rap about it and talk about it. But just give me your spin on that a little bit. What were you conveying in that quote?
There's a lot of people who talked it and didn't live it. But I think that that's the case. I mean, if you really are in that life, you really aren't necessarily making records about it because the feds listen, as we now know, the police listen to everything.
Right.
And so I always felt like, that's why partly why I did CB4 with Chris Rock. Because the whole idea was basically based on real stuff. The idea of the MC taking the life or details of a real G and, using that as a fodder for most of their records. I mean, Ice Cube, who's one of the most articulate MCs of all time, one of the most, who helped birth gangster rap to a great degree. He went to college in Arizona. He's been happily married for like 30 years. I'm not saying he's a studio gangster necessarily, but I'm saying that if you didn't know better, you think that Ice Cube was out there shooting people every day. Right. And he clearly was not. He was writing rhymes and he was taking care of his family. So black artists also are not allowed to sometimes be artists. Sometimes if a black person does it, well, they must have done it. They must have lived it. Whereas no one asked if Martin Scorsese was in the mob. We know Martin Scorsese was in the mob, but he was an observer of mob-like behavior. And that's what most rappers are. So, but they're not, the way we work here.
They're gangster adjacent.
Exactly. All of them are gangster adjacent. Right. That's not the same thing as being a gangster.
No, not at all. I mean, you also spend time on someone who we've touched on in conversation before, Bill Underwood.
Yeah.
And you mentioned how Bill, for those that don't know, actually just got out of federal penitentiary after 34 years. He was accused of a lot of different things, but was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and was just released a couple of weeks ago compassionately. He's in good health and living in New York. But in one of the chapters, Nelson, you talk about Bill at a music conference and him talking about the need to independently. I remember he used to use the description to me, we need to press and distribute. But you talk about him in ways that kind of highlight his intellectual capabilities, as even having come from the street. But give me your take on what Bill what he represented to you.
Well, I remember, I never forget the speech that I talk about. It was at Jack the Rapper, which was this amazing black music conference that went on for like 20 years or so. I think it was 18 years. And I know he came out in a white suit. He had those Kumo D glasses, the blue ones. And he was getting an award, I think, as promotion man. He said in a speech like, black music turns into Krugerrands, turns into Deutschmarks, turns into Lira. And, it was almost like the Michael Douglas Greed is Good speech, it had that kind of, the room got really quiet because he was talking about black music as a global economic entity. That vision is rare. And in the business part of it, we're in a reckoning right now in the record business. People are trying to really deal with the legacy of systematic abuse of black artists. And his speech was about that. And his speech was about the global reach of our culture. And we've never, I shouldn't say never, but only sporadically have been able to really monetize that in the way we should. I mean, it's interesting, man, because, the issue back then was always distribution. Who controls that? Now this generation has the ability to go outside of that and to create their own structures. It's interesting to see. The problem is, I think, that I don't know if this generation has the same vision of black identity or nationalist identity, because we were all coming out of, we still had all heard Stokely and we'd all heard Malcolm. It was still very alive in our minds, even in the late, the early 80s. Now we're another, 20, 30 years later. They have the tools, but I don't know if they have the vision of black empowerment.
Right.
The tools are here.
I want to, now that you bring up that topic, I want to bring up something that Marie Brown, who is a person we referred to earlier, she's an iconic black publisher, probably has been in the publishing business longer than any African-American I know, and an old friend of my family's, and obviously someone who meant a lot to you. But you quoted her in your book, talking about how she said during the 60s, the first multicultural renaissance, black books were in. When I returned to Doubleday in the 70s, I was instructed to diversify my list. So basically she's saying that we had a cultural moment of, that resonated with folks during that period. Interestingly enough, in talking with her yesterday, we talked about her recent quote in the New York Times, basically saying that we're in one of those moments again.
Absolutely.
Do you see the same thing, Nelson?
It's in publishing, it's in film, it's in all of the different traditional media, and obviously now with streaming and so forth. I was a kid during that 70s wave, and then during the 90s wave, I was right up in there. So I talk a lot with Reggie Hudlin, with Chris Rock, with other folks who I've known now 20, 30 years about where we are now and the sustainability of this particular moment. And the question is always going to be, do we build institutions within these moments that allow us not to be, when we're no longer a trend, to sustain? We didn't do a good job of that in the 90s. I don't know that Spike, I would say Spike of everyone, built 40 Acres and a Mule through his Intuit and Enduring. He does advertising, he has an advertising agency. Spike is very entrepreneurial. But most of the other folks did not build businesses that sustained. And that can sustain the droughts. I think that's really the key thing. It's not about everyone gets hot and cold, as you know, in this business. It's about, do you have a structure that sustains you when you're not hot anymore? And the key will be, out of this era, will there be a number of black businesses, media businesses, that are able, once, maybe in 2 years, and we're on to the next thing. Black may not be in anymore. Maybe everything is going to be about Asian people. Who knows what's going to happen? Mm-hmm. Will we have enough structures that can continue creating content to fulfill our needs, both intellectually and emotionally? That's always the challenge, I think, here. That's always the challenge. And so out of this era, will the Issa Raes and the other folks, Oprah is one example of someone who's built an ongoing business model that's continued going forward. We need 10 of those people. We don't just need one.
I relate that to the restaurant industry. When my dad started the Cellar in 74, I remember the mainstream media just did not pay attention to black-owned restaurants, and there were no such thing as restaurant publicists back in the 70s. In fact, your old publication, the Amsterdam News, Audrey Bernard, a columnist with Amsterdam News, that was one of the two places that we would get ink. It was the Amsterdam News and Jet Magazine, and the Go Out with the In crowd, that column. But, one of the things that I'm sensitive about right now is with the conversations evolving around racial and social justice from 2020, the food industry, the black culinary, the African-American culinary journey is getting a new level of interest and exploration into the roots of from Africa to here and what made it over, what foods made it over, what what diets were, consumed by slaves, where that food came from, farming, and how that's evolved into the scene that we have today with emerging Black chefs who, are proliferating at a rate that, prior to now has not happened. And the media is seemingly catching up. James Beard had an issue over the lack of diversity. Bon Appetit hired a Black food editor. But I have felt as a restaurateur, I'm not a chef, as an African-American restaurateur, the absence of Black journalists to cover my story, because our story, Nelson, is always a little different.
Well, I mean, I think that's, it's funny because I thought that at some point I would not be doing stuff that I do. I thought there'd be a whole nother wave of people who do what I did. And there hasn't really been as many as I thought. Part of it is that I got access from the Amsterdam News, then through Billboard and then the Village Voice. I was able to quote unquote cross over in a sense to wider audiences. One of the things that's happened is that we've lost the Jets, we've lost the Ebonies. Amsterdam News is not the force it was, the Black media. So where are these venues that is the Griot and all those, are they filling that role or not? I'm not sure. But I don't feel like there's enough access for young writers to expand and to cover the range of things that need to be covered. I mean, one of the issues is that we have, when I was in Amsterdam News, they used to say, we would say, it's another Black story. We used to say that because there were just so many things that needed to be covered and so many outlets looking for exposure. It was almost overwhelming because again, in that era, there was few outlets. There's more media. There's me and blogs. There's me and but how many of them have the critical mass to really make a difference that drives people to a restaurant? I just don't know. And I think I think in a sense, it's weird, man, because when you guys started The Cellar, your father, because all Black people read the Amsterdam News at some point, it drove people to the restaurant. I'd be hard pressed, and this might be just because I'm old, to find what is the outlet if you want to reach a 40-year-old Black couple who want to go out to dinner, for Valentine's Day. What is the outlet that will hit those eyeballs? Those are the.
Yeah, and you're touching on it. I don't know if you saw the article in the New York Times from this past Sunday, but how much there is to compete for our attention these days. How many places we go to for information. I usually read the New York Times every Sunday. I couldn't read it this Sunday because I wanted to finish your book. There's always a trade. We put down something to pick up something else, our phone. So to your point, there's so many places now talking to us and talking at us. And then we're on social media. We're posting our own stuff. We're doing podcasts. There's just so much competition for our attention. And then, I want to get your take on and then dive back into Brooklyn a little bit during that very rich cultural time that you talked about, because we're seeing the core of our communities just start to disintegrate. Harlem, South LA, Brooklyn gentrifying. So when our culture starts to dissipate and out into the suburbs and further away to other boroughs and outside of Los Angeles, and where's the center of Black culture these days?
I always say, it was a joke we made in Good Hair when I worked with Chris Rock, but Atlanta. Yeah. Atlanta's kind of that. Well, one of the things that's an unspoken part of gentrification, at least I can speak to the Brooklyn part, is that when you look at what happened in Georgia in the last election, I would love to see a statistic on how much of that is expatriate Northerners in the South. When you look at what's going on in Virginia, like my mother moved back there and from which a lot of that energy, those homeowners, those, the teachers and the bus drivers and the people who used to go to the Cellar, a lot of them are living in North Carolina, Virginia. So when you look at the demographics and the electoral, I think you are seeing the impact of those people. So I think that's the good part of it. That it's brought back a lot of really somewhat moneyed retired or retiring Black people down south.
Kind of a reverse migration.
Yes, absolutely.
We're talking about, right? Mm-hmm.
I think the New York thing I guess goes back to this thing about ownership. These houses that were owned, that you bought in 1975 for $17,000, or you bought for $125,000 in '85. These houses are valued at some of them now $2-3 million, depending on where you are and how much people want to buy them from you. So the question is, do you sell and cash in, or do you hold on? And I think that's been the big issue. I think people have cashed in. So there's that part, and then there's just the straight up people getting jacked out of their apartments. And I put it this way, Brett, if you're a renter in these areas, you're in trouble. If you're an owner, I think you have some power. But if you're renting in Crown Heights, if you're renting in East Harlem and you don't have a good lease, they're going to push you out of there. And I don't know quite how to address that. I don't know enough of an economist to know how to turn that around. But that's what's happening all over, is that the rental market in these areas, like Bed-Stuy, the homeowner blocks in Bed-Stuy, along Stuyvesant, along, Malcolm X, people still have those, but people are selling those off to, real estate companies. They're taking that. If I can get $1 million and these guys flip it for $2 million, I'm taking that money. So I don't know what the fundamental way we do, but I do feel the absence. I mean, you go to Harlem, man, wow, it's a different world. And I just don't know how do you stop the tide of economic transition that's happening. Again, this goes back, I think it all goes back to consciousness. Is this something that you feel committed to? Can you turn your cultural concern into an economic concern? Can you make people want to hold on to this property in the face of the offers they're getting? I don't know. I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to contemplate, but I hear you. I mean, economics are going to rule, but I do worry about, as Black restaurants are starting to pop up around the country and Black chefs are, getting a different look these days. And nice. As those communities, I mean, we opened Post and Beam in South LA. And I wasn't sure if we were part of the reason why the community, I knew the community, they certainly supported us and were happy that we were there. But I was charging $24 for fried chicken. So was I, and, real estate brokers that were showing right. folks those neighborhoods, those beautiful homes in Baldwin Hills, Adair Heights View Park. Right. A lot of them were not African American, but they would bring them to Post and Beam to say, look, some of the amenities the neighborhood could. So was I, part of the problem, with that. But I don't know the answer either, man. And it's going to continue to unfold, I guess, and we'll have to watch it. I'm hoping like you can commentate a little bit more on the restaurant world, because you have such an important voice and you can bring a level of perspective to this that I feel is missing.
I'll tell you a story. When I started writing about hip hop, I had a moment in there where like, if I keep writing about this stuff, other people are going to come in the community. So there was a moment where I thought about if we keep promoting this culture as the new hip thing, it's only 5 minutes away from the money coming in and it being jacked. It didn't totally get jacked at that time. It was a longer period, but I think that's always the trade-off with our culture, mm-hmm. is that we create dynamic, whether it's food, music, dance, art, literature. At what point does it become pop culture, and how do we negotiate that versus how does it keep it? And the truth is, as Americans, our instinct is always to go pop because we always want the most people to know our shit. Mm-hmm. But that brings certain challenges economically because we don't have a very strong economic base. So we're always in danger. It's always vulnerable to a jack move. So I guess the question I would have about the Black restaurant space, are these Black restaurants, are they being supported by chefs by Black money? Or who owns the damn thing? It's like when I look at Clubhouse, everyone wants to be on Clubhouse. Well, they just got evaluated at $1 billion. But who owns Clubhouse? Are brothers getting some of that $1 billion? Because it's brothers who are making Clubhouse hot. So I'm like, I don't want to be on Clubhouse. I don't need to be on Clubhouse. I got enough to do. But you know what I'm saying? These are all
enough places to check.
Come on, I don't need to be on another thing. But so I do think that the question I would have, and it's worth exploring, is. Mm-hmm. Will the Black culinary explosion benefit both the actual chefs? And then what does it mean for the community? Are we training more Black chefs? Are we training Black people how to run restaurants? I think that's, to your point, I think that's how these things get perpetuated. You have to pass, if the information is not being passed on, it's just a top-down situation where money is going out and coming in, but we're not perpetuating the culture.
I would agree. And I also feel that the importance of capturing our story and documenting our story is of value too. When I went to try to get my dad's obituary printed in the New York Times, there wasn't enough, printed material for them to Google. So I couldn't justify or verify who he was. And then I called Susan Taylor and, got her, but we were never able to get it done, as opposed to Elaine from Elaine's got a full page. And, I compared my dad's life to Elaine's life, and, it just kind of points to the challenge that we have as Black entrepreneurs in the struggle to, for
Right.
recognition, even, in some cases.
So what is the best book on the history of black restaurants? Is there a book or
Well,
documentary?
there's a historian, a guy named Adrian Miller, who's getting more and more prominent, who I tend to tap into for various quotes. But Toni Tipton Martin is starting to do, she's writing quite a bit. But I just think that there's just so much more room. When we lost Alberta Wright of Jezebel, there was a nice article on her in the New York Times. They did do her obituary. But I don't have Alberta on film. There's no, I talked to Valerie Simpson a couple of weeks ago. She did the podcast. When we were at 2020, we had Nina Simone, the Ohio Players, no film. No footage. And that some of that's on us. I get it. We weren't walking around with phones back then. So we weren't as conscious we were in the moment. We enjoyed where we were and what we were doing. But, I feel the absence of not having captured some of these stories. And once they're gone, they're gone.
Man, Jezebels. Wow, man. I have to bring it back. You asked me that question earlier. Jezebels was the spot for me in my 20s and the 30s. It was on 9th Avenue, I think 45th.
45th and 9th, yeah.
It was 3 blocks from Billboard. So I would go there every night, almost after work, just to look at the pretty people, to hang out at the bar. That was, oh man, and she was, what a woman she was. That was a spot.
Alberta was incredible, man. That was an amazing spot. Truly incredible. Yeah.
And sea crab soup, man.
Oh, you know it. Yeah. Yep. And that goat cheese salad, man. Crazy.
Oh yeah.
Banana pudding, all of that. So we're running out of time here, Nelson, and I had 4 pages of things I really wanted to try to cover with you, but of course I knew I wouldn't be able to get to all of them. So I'm just going to have to kind of jump ahead here. And so I just want to get, from you musically, what are you listening to these days? What's inspiring you?
The younger people, I love Anderson .Paak. I love her. So I've been trying to, there's a kid named Daniel Caesar, who's done a bunch of great duets. So I listen to a lot of that, the newer wave of R&B. And I'm also, there's a Marvin Gaye album that just came out. It's an instrumental album. It's called Funky Nation. He recorded it apparently right after What's Going On. It's got Hamilton Bohannon on drums, Ray Parker Jr. on guitar, Michael Henderson on bass, Wah-Wah Watson on second guitar, and Marvin's playing keys. And that just came out. Great instrumental tracks. So that's been my my fun throwback thing. But I urge I think one thing that happens with R&B is that a lot of the older heads are like, there's nothing going on anymore. But there's Jasmine Sullivan, Pac, Daniel Caesar, her. There's a lot of great young artists, and we need to be supporting them and keeping that tradition alive.
I hear you, man. And I'm also happy to see Gil Scott-Heron, just constantly reemerge. Yes. It was a remix where one of his old tracks that talked about stealing the country. The man who tried to steal America is now behind bars,
Right.
But Gil making himself felt again. Nelson, man, I'm so appreciative of you doing this, and I just I want to say to you, man, how much respect I have for you, and I just want to keep hearing your voice. We need people like you out there guiding us, through times and articulating our experiences the way that you do. I just deep admiration for you and the stuff that you do, man. Keep doing it.
Man, Brett, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, you've been a big part of my life from 2020 to and just, we didn't even talk about Roxbury's and
or Georgia. We didn't get to that.
Oh, Georgia.
Next time.
Oh man, Georgia! I was there a night that OJ got acquitted.
Wow!
Remember that night?
Yeah, we had a victory party for the defense team that night.
That's right. And I saw Johnny.
We got bomb threats.
Yeah, exactly. And I got out of there. I was like, no, I left early, brother.
Oh man, but we're still here, Nelson. So thank you so much, brother. And I look forward to talking to you, seeing you soon, man. Stay healthy.
Okay.
Stay safe.
As you too. Peace.
Thank you, man. Hey, Ambassador. How you doing?
Hello there, Mr. Johnson. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you. So what's going on in your world today? What are you going to tell us about?
Oh, there's so much. Where should I start? I said, let me start with halal. I think many people are learning different kinds of food preparations now. There's vegan preparation, there's gluten-free, and then they have this halal, which is just the kind of lawful preparation of food for people who are generally of the Islamic faith, but it's just really blessing the food. And they also have a big craze now in the hospitality industry and travel are halal tours all over the globe, really on the high side, usually very exotic and experiential. And it's so that they can make sure that wherever they travel, they can trustfully eat the food and have various experiences. So about 3 years ago, this brother named Captain Talib, who lives out of Canada, was designing these high-end yacht excursion sails from St. Vincent in the Grenadines. And of course, COVID put a little bit of a crimp in that. But we were talking recently because so many people are now eager. And he's now setting up something, these long sails, 1 to 2 weeks, exploring the islands of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, of which there are really 32 captivating islands located right there in the Caribbean Sea. You have your main stretch. If you look on the map, it looks like one main body, but if you get closer, there are these little dots, and each one has its own personality. Some are inhibited, some are not. Those that are not actually have like really exotic hikes. You can do horseback riding, and the reefs are amazing, volcano visiting, making sure that nothing is hot or anything like that.
I want to go back for a minute, though, just to the halal portion. Now, I've always associated halal with kosher.
Well, it's the same way. Kosher is a preparation, right? It's not that the animal is different, but it's fed differently. It's prepared differently. The intention is different, right? So halal, galat, kosher, pretty much the same way. It's one of the things I can always count on, that where I go, that there's no pork in the space. But now we have a lot of people. You don't have to be of the faiths associated. People are really mindful about how they digest prepared foods. And so they will have in some of their locations, the hotels as well as the sailing components. The brother has something called Safina Vacations. Safinah, Safina Vacations, and then there's Safina Sailing, which is that specific trip connecting all of those Grenadine Island locations, which I can't wait to do. I know you love the water.
I do.
So when he mentioned it to me before about creating a designated hosted experience, I was always kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But I'm really excited about it.
So would the idea be to spend a day or so in port at a particular island?
That's exactly right. Over the week or two, you can choose any of those locations. And he said that depending on who's on the tour, that you might say, I don't want to get back on the ship. They start with breakfast, they sail all night, they land in the morning. And if it's something that the crowd or the group enjoys, then they're docking right there. And there's 6 cabins on each. So it's 2 people per cabin, depending on how you rest, how you live.
How you move.
And how you move. But if there's a larger group, they kind of sail side by side, which is also kind of cool. So you can have a group of 20 people and just that many sails, and then they dock together, which is really quite cool. So there's a chef on board. It's inclusive with the chef, and it has a doctor on board as well as the captains. Really cool.
Traveling with you is an extra special treat because one of your real skill sets is the ability to find interesting things to do, interesting people that are doing them. Can you elaborate on how you foresee that interweaving with this type of excursion and island hopping?
Well, yes, because one of the things we never take into consideration when we see a dot on a map is indeed how the people live. And so it's key not just to have a kind of land and do, but land and engage. Who's there? What is the music? We do those things where we plan ahead of time and you understand the characteristics of the people in the lands that we visit, whether it's in the Caribbean or the African continent or here in the United States. I'm here in Louisville. I'm a New Yorker in Appalachia. And I couldn't just stamp myself around. I had to listen and hear and feel and see how people move.
You remind me of our very first podcast with Norm Nixon and how Norm talked about reading up on a place before you go there and visit. And I think that the days, I mean, everybody loves a great beach. I love a great beach, but to travel to these beautiful places and not really get into the culture and understand the history and the people and who's lived there. And I think it's just you're missing an opportunity. Yes, go to the beach, but also know a little something about the place that you're visiting.
Exactly right. And narratives are key. That's why we pause. On the way to the site, we have a stop somewhere where we're going to learn a little bit about the person in the village, or we're not just going to shop at the gift store. We're going to go to where they actually make it so that we can see the process and feel the hand that touches it. That's essential.
Well, sign me up. I'm so with this.
Well, I thought about you in that water.
The name again of the gentleman whose tour it is.
He's Captain Talib Khan, and it's Safina Sailing or Safina Vacations, and you can go online and see them. But we're going to actually set up some specific ones in context to how we move and the corner table.
Well, that is going to be a trip of a lifetime, and I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us and the listeners today. Much appreciated. You take care, and we will be talking to you real soon, no doubt.
Like real soon.
Corner Table Talk is hosted by Brad Johnson, produced by Brad and Linda Ailes Johnson, coordinating producer Lauren Turner, theme music Life Goes On by Bryce Vine, executive producers Omar Thompson, Andrew Kalb, and Ken Johnson. Find the Corner Table Talk podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Follow, subscribe, rate, and leave a comment. Corner Table Talk is a Say It Loud Network production.